So the next question, actually, we might get our presidents on the panel to answer this one because this is another tricky question. Resources are typically allocated based on the number of majors in a department, or they can be. Or there are certain formulas or historical ways. And the question here is, do you know of other perhaps better or more creative models for allocation of resources? So what can you do with respect to that very real structural barrier? Some creative answers from top leaders. No pressure.
Leave it entirely up to the president to give the money to whoever he or she likes the most.
Well, that's one way.
Yeah. That's a great question, and I think one of the techniques we're going to try is to have an ongoing, what we're going to call, for lack of a better name, strategic advisory committee that will advise the president about resource allocation. And this is a going forward thing, so we don't have any experience with it yet. But the goal is to have a group of faculty that come from across campus to look at the needs of the academic needs of the institution as we proceed to more and more interdisciplinary opportunities for our students. And where are the resources needed the most? What are the priorities? And paying less attention to the typical measures of the past of how many students you're teaching in your discipline or how many majors you have or whatever, and more attention to the development of the programs that we want to see developed on campus. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to do it in this way with significant faculty input as opposed to the administration just trying to figure it out on their own. I mean, we could do it. We could do some analysis and try to figure out and try to set the priorities, but I think it'll be more effective and it will produce a better result if the faculty's involved. So that's a technique we're going to at least try and see if it helps.
Scott.
Yeah, and I don't think this differs in any significant way from what Tom was just saying. And I think that Tom and I are both at small colleges, and so in some ways our lives are less rigid about how it is we have to allocate resources than it might be at a larger university. But we've just instituted a process in which the dean and the president write a statement of curricular priorities that's vetted through the faculty, and they're not shy about offering opinions. And then we actually have then established a faculty group that is chaired by the dean. At Beloit, it's effectively a provost, who then that group receives what are very serious proposals for tenure track positions. And we've moved away from, if somebody retires, you automatically get that position filled. And these are serious conversations that are taking place with an eye towards, and this was written in the priorities, which was then agreed to by the faculty, that we're going to privilege proposals, and Mary was talking about this yesterday, we're going to privilege proposals that are collaborations across departments. And we have some structures that make that work over the longer run. But that's really changed the dialogue on campus, and it changes the way people come at their conversations about making a case for those positions. So of the single thing that has made a difference on our campus to change the conversation, that's been the biggest one.
Mary, Terry, Bernadette, if you were in charge, how would you, if you were the president, what might you do that might be more creative than a traditional resource allocation? Here's Terry. At Ohio State, what would you do, Terry, if you were in charge? That's actually a dangerous question to ask Terry.
It's very dangerous.
But that's why I asked it.
Toga, no. We have a new executive dean, and our arts and sciences have just coalesced 5 colleges and unified them. And the approach that our executive dean is taking is actually one that I really appreciate. He is a big proponent of strong disciplinary departments. We have 41 departments in the arts and sciences and 2,000 faculty. So it's substantive. We have 71 majors and 113 minors, and about 20 of the majors and 40 to 50 of the minors are interdisciplinary of sorts. We have some strong centers that are all based on the research, but he has said, and the reason is I really like our executive dean. He's really making some nice changes. But everything from faculty hiring, where proposals come in, and if they have a positive impact on more than one unit, they are more likely to get funded than if they don't. And that's a word that comes from the dean, who has all the purse string. I mean, he controls all the funding. When you have that kind of leverage, that makes a difference. So, if but you have to have that. Unfortunately, he is a neuroscientist, so he came out of an interdisciplinary background, created an interdisciplinary major when he was at Indiana. So there are things that he has done that I really strongly believe will facilitate that interdisciplinary effort. And one of the other things, as he said, is that he does not want a strong interdisciplinary graduate program that does not also have a strong undergraduate program to go with it. Mm-hmm. Those go hand in hand. And so both of those things, I think, have really are going to facilitate that for the future.
So paying more attention to goals and strategies and plans and aligning how resources, in particular faculty lines, are what we've heard. So this question is about assessing interdisciplinary knowledge and success, or the change, the value added. And I might also add to this question, we can't just keep adding new majors and new minors and courses in the curriculum. So how do we assess the interdisciplinary learning that we are intending, but also then be paying attention to the rest of the curriculum? Do programs need to be sunsetted? How does that happen? What kind of flexibility? Because this is kind of the elephant in the room is, not to pick on anybody, but the chemistry major or the physics major. Do those stay, or do we move toward entirely interdisciplinary majors? But really the heart of this question is, how do we know students are able to integrate, synthesize, transfer? How do we know we're actually accomplishing that?
Can I, it's funny that that question came up because I'm in the process of trying to write another grant with another interdisciplinary team from environmental science, and people keep going back to these standards. What should the standards look like? How should we address them? But ultimately, I think all of the disciplines are necessary, and I don't think they should go away, but there should be core competencies coming out of those standards that an interdisciplinarily trained student possess those core competencies based upon their area of concentration. I know that's a different way of kind of looking at things, but how do we set that mechanism up? Because ultimately, even if you're a chemistry major, a physics major, mathematics major, engineer, you have standards or some other kind of licensure that you must go through. But what core competencies do you possess? And those need to be promoted into any kind of program that combines those things. Core competencies. I mean, that's something that we see the word, we look at student outcomes, we look at program outcomes, but what can you do at the end of the day? And ultimately, that's what employers look for. What are you able to do? What are you able to bring and add to the industry, to the company, to the initiative? Core competencies.
Could you provide, Bernadette, an example of a way you might measure a programmatic competency that would get at interdisciplinary learning?
For example, if you're doing some type of research in a lab, research has certain components. If it's a lab or outside, or if it's social science research, well, how can you use the tools that go along with that particular research measurement? Do you understand the basic measures of central tendency? Can you employ things that will get at the questions that your discipline or your interdisciplinary disciplinary focus is asking? Mm-hmm. Do you have the tools necessary to answer the question? Can you look at the literature in such a way that will garner or pull out the answers to the question? Mm-hmm. So those are core competencies. Can you add, multiply, and write about it?
Mary, maybe you can provide some examples. Lafayette's got some great interdisciplinary learning goals and presumably some great assessments to go along with them.
Thank you. Page 11, by the way. We're actually in the book. But it strikes me, there's a couple things I guess I want to say, and they go with alignment, and they go a little bit with the question before. If I were president, what I'd love to do is make sure that every program on my campus clearly articulated the competencies it wanted its students to achieve, and that they were accountable for looking at those and seeing whether they're achieved. That helps a president or anyone else or the board of trustees decide what do we what do we get rid of? If we need to, what is growing? What's really going forward? And so many campuses have so many programs that have not articulated what they are trying to achieve. It takes time. It's not going to be something you can solve, but if a campus can go through that process, it makes the rest so much more transparent to look at. But then getting back to, well, how do you assess it? So we actually thought very seriously about this in the program we developed, and we really started, and it took us a number of months to kind of clarify the goals we were aiming at, and that's the page 11 goals. Mm-hmm. And then we talked for another few months about, well, how will we know that they've achieved these goals? What can we measure? What can we look at? And some of the things we talked about, we talked about some NESI data and other things, but we really ended up deciding we're going to need to sit down with the students as they graduate at the end of the program, and not only the students that have actually completed the program we've designed, but also the students that have come in late, because we did design the program very specifically to do that, and really treat them like a focus group and ask them questions. What have they been able to do? And follow up a couple years later to make sure that they can still articulate it, or maybe articulate it differently if they've realized some things on reflection post-graduation. But you need to talk to them. Yeah. These are complicated questions. They're not answered in a simple NESI senior survey question. Mm-hmm. And you don't need to talk to necessarily all of them. We have a small program. We'll talk to all of them. But if you had a large program, you can sample. There are ways to go about it. But you're going to need to talk to them.
So talking to students themselves, what a novel idea. Actually asking them without just having them write a report or do an assignment or take the NESI or some other campus survey.
And asking with examples, not just do you think you can do it, but talk to me about how you do it. Why do you know that? Why do you say that?
Many of the campus posters will highlight assessment, not in any detailed way, but maybe this conversation can also be continued at the posters. And we're just a couple of minutes early, but I think that'll be all right. You guys have been a great audience listening. Let's thank our panelists.